Today we're going to do the front brakes on a 2011 Mercedes-Benz GL450. The GL stands for Geländewagen. In German that pretty much just means off-road. So here you can see I've opened the cap of the brake fluid reservoir and put a rag around it. That's in case any fluid comes out when I recompress the calipers while I'm doing the brake job. Okay, here's the front rotor. And this is a free-floating type rotor, which means that it glides back and forth on two pins. Those pins are held in with a 9mm Allen. Now, this is not a standard size. You don't normally get a 9mm with an Allen set, so you have to order one of these specially. Just check your Allen socket Allen set and make sure you have a 9mm, because that's the size that you're going to need to take the two pins out that hold the caliper in. Passenger side, you'll see that this brake caliper is fitted with a wear sensor on the brake pads. The driver side does not have one. On the Mercedes-Benz, only the passenger side has the wear sensor, and that's the same for the front and the back. The first thing we're going to do is remove this spring clip. The spring clip is what keeps the brakes from vibrating and keeps this side of the caliper tight. They come out fairly easy. The best way is just put a screwdriver in there. Okay, the first thing we're going to do now is remove the hydraulic portion of the caliper, and you do that by running out these two 9mm pins that hold it into position. They're not very tight, and they should come out fairly easy. Once the top one's loose, just untorque the bottom one and run those out. These European rotors, they're usually very soft, and as you can see here, they wear a pretty good rim into the rotor itself, both ends on both sides. You can feel it back here too, more so on the back side. So what you have to do in order to get the hydraulic portion of the caliper off is to compress the cylinders a little bit. And that's just put a screwdriver in there or a pry bar and compress those a little, and then that will slide off of there easy once the pins come out. The top pin out, you can see this is a 9mm socket that fits into that, and this is the pin that the caliper actions back and forth on. The two pins taken out and the hydraulic cylinder compressed, we can just slide this hydraulic portion of the caliper off. The hydraulic portion of the brake caliper apart, we're going to leave the backside pad in that plugs into the hydraulic cylinders, and we're going to use our compressing tool to compress the caliper the rest of the way, because when the new pads go in, they're going to be much thicker than these old pads, so we want the brake caliper to be completely compressed. There, that didn't have far to go. I got this compression tool off of Amazon.com. It was only a couple of bucks, and it's a good investment. As we said before, the passenger side is the only one that gets the brake wear sensor, and that just unplugs straight out. And there's a sensor there, and that's connected into the backside pad that clips into the hydraulic cylinder. And you can see it there. There's the old pad with the brake wear sensor, and we're going to replace the sensor when we put the new pads in. Looking at these front pads, what appears to have happened from the people that we bought this vehicle from is they have changed the front pads, but they've put these brand new front pads on an old rotor. We're going to go ahead and change everything today because it's just a good idea. I'd like to start everything fresh, and we were judging the need for new brakes based on the wear of the rotor and not necessarily the pads. But you can see here these old pads have not been in very long, and all they've done is they've put a new pad onto an old rotor. Taking the hydraulic portion of the caliper off, we've hung it up here with a wire, because you don't want the caliper to hang from its hoses and from the electrical connection to the brake wear sensor, because it could do it damage. So hang your calipers up, they're quite heavy, and don't let them hang on the hoses or the wire. Next thing we're going to do is take the bracket off. The bracket is held on by two bolts that are 21mm, and they should be fairly easy to get out. Taking out the bolts that hold on the bracket, they were extremely over tightened. They don't need to be that tight. Follow the manual, torque the bolts with a torque wrench to the specification, and they're coming out so hard. I also believe that whoever did this last used Loctite Red on the threads. And gentlemen, please do a brother a favor. Don't put Loctite red on these parts. Use Loctite blue, because these bolts are going to have to come out again sometime in the future to change the brakes and rotors. Finally got the top bolt loose. There's the bracket. We're going to clean that bracket up down to clean bare metal. And since some enterprising young man decided it was a good idea to put Loctite red on these bolts, I'm going to run a tap through these threads just to make sure the threads are nice and clean. The bolt threads look alright, but you can see there a little bit of the residue from the Loctite red. Next thing we're going to do is take the old rotor off. The old rotor has a set screw that's held in here. It's held in by a Torx 30 screw. It's just a short screw with, probably has some Loctite on it. And what I'm using today is a impact driver to get that screw out. They can sometimes be a pain. They're easy to strip off, and the impact driver just makes very short work of it. There's the set screw. I always replace these. I put new screws in each time. They're pretty cheap, and they come with Loctite blue already on the thread, so I'm going to replace this one. Rotor is an old rotor. It's been on there for quite some time, and these Mercedes GL450 rotors, they have two split pins, locating pins that hold the rotor on, and they can sometimes get corroded. So it's good to hit that with a little WD-40 or other kind of penetrating oil. Let that soak in a bit, because we're probably going to have to hit it with a hammer a little bit to get the old one off. Okay, I had to tap this one with a hammer a little bit to get it off, but there it is. There's the hub, and you can see the locating pins that locate the brake rotor onto the hub. I'm going to clean the hub off with a wire wheel, get all this old corrosion off, and just clean everything up, and then we'll put a nice coat of anti-seize on it. We've got the hub all cleaned off with a wire wheel. I'm going to put a nice coating of anti-seize lubricant on it. This is just a general purpose anti-seize that I got from the auto parts store. The hub is clean. I've got a good coat of anti-seize on it. The mating surfaces for the bracket are nice and clean with the wire wheel. And the next thing we're going to do is mount the rotor. The parts I'm using today are from partsgeek.com. This is the axle pack. I like to buy the axle pack because it gives you all the parts that you need to do a complete brake job. Rotors, pads, and all the hardware for the caliper. Centric rotor with that came with the partsgeek.com axle pack. This is the standard grade rotor, and I've gotten very good service out of these. We don't put a whole lot of miles on this car, so this rotor and this pad set could easily last 4 to 5 years. These rotors come with a preservative on them, so before we mount the rotor on the hub, we want to clean these off with brake cleaner and get that preservative off of there so that we don't gum up the new pads with that preservative lubricant. Mount the new rotor. You want to line it up on the two split pins that are provided on the hub, and make sure you have the set screw hole lined up on the threads for the set screw on the hub. There we go. This is the new set screw. This is also from partsgeek.com. I change these just as a general rule with every brake job because they can sometimes be a pain to get out. It's nice to have a new one in there when you go to do the job the next time, even though it may be quite some years before we do this again. Torque the set screw. It uses a Torx 30, and you just want to run that in. It's already got the Loctite blue already on it. Don't over tighten it, just tight enough, but you don't really want it to be any tighter than that. Now we have the new rotor on. It's time to do the bracket, but as you can see, this bracket is very dirty, so I want to clean this bracket up with a wire wheel. I want to pay special attention to these sliding surfaces where the brake pads ride. Make sure that these sliding surfaces are nice and clean down to bare metal and are free of any burrs. And because some genius thought it was a good idea to put Loctite red on these mounting bolts for the bracket, I'm going to run a tap through these threads just to clean the threads out and make sure everything's free and clear of that hard Loctite red thread locker. Got the bracket all cleaned up with a wire wheel. You can see our sliding surfaces that the brake pads action on. Want to take a piece of emery cloth and just make sure that those sliding surfaces are nice and clean. There's no burrs and you're down to nice clean bare metal. Got the bracket nice and clean. You can see the sliding surfaces are ready to go. Because somebody thought it was a good idea to put Loctite red on the bolts holding the bracket in, I'm going to run this tap through it just to clean the threads out. This is an M14.1.5 tap. It's just a Harbor Freight tap set. It's a good thing to have in your garage when you run up against something like this. Had an extremely difficult time getting the bolts out, so I just want to run this through and make sure the threads are nice and clean before we put the bolts back in it. Just going to run the tap in, clean those threads out, get all of that Loctite red out. It's going in very easy. It means the thread's in good shape. I'm just going to run it all the way through. Got the bracket nice and clean. I've used this M14 times 1.5 tap to chase the threads out where the Loctite red was. Got quite a bit of Loctite red residue out of it, so now it's ready to go back together. Before we put it back together, I want to put some brake lubricant on the sliding surfaces here, and I'm just going to put a nice amount in here. This is the slides where the brake pads are going to actuate back and forth. I just want to make sure that those are nice and clean and well lubricated. And this is just a standard ceramic brake lubricant that I got from the auto parts store. Got the bolts ready to go in, the brackets ready to go back on. I've taken a wire wheel and cleaned these threads up good, and I'm going to put some Loctite blue on here. Again guys, no Loctite red on these maintenance parts because these parts are going to have to be removed again at some point when it's time to do another brake job. Just remount the bracket, line that back up, and run the bolts in. Okay, this is the bottom bolt. Got this one ready to go, Loctite blue, and just run this bolt in. Bolts are in, and they're in all the way. Go to your maintenance manual and get the torque specification from this. Make sure you torque all the brake parts to their specified torque. I don't call out torques on my videos because all different years and different models are different, so go to your manual and torque these pieces properly with a torque wrench in accordance with the specification. The bracket is now torqued to spec. We got our rotor on, set screw in. The next thing I'm going to do is make the hydraulic cylinder portion of the caliper ready to be reinstalled. When you get the axle pack from partsgeek.com, they give you new rubber boots. The pins right inside of this rubber boot, so I'm going to take these old ones out and put the new ones in. They come out fairly easy. Just get a pair of channel locks or a pair of pliers and they just pull right out. These are the new boots that come with the axle pack, and I'm going to press those into the holes there on the hydraulic cylinder. But before I do that, I want to put just a little Vaseline to condition this rubber and help them install easier, and it'll keep this rubber fresh over the years to come. Okay, we got the new boot. It's got Vaseline on it, and we're just going to push it through the hole until it clips through on the flange on the other side. Okay, that's it. Got the two new boots installed, and the next thing we're going to do is take a look at the sliding pins that the hydraulic cylinder actuates on. Here's the sliding pin. It's in pretty good shape. There's a little bit of corrosion here at the end. I'm just going to take some emery cloth and clean that up. Clean the pins up, get all the dirt and old corrosion off of them, and then we'll coat them up with anti-seize before we reinstall them. Okay, we've got the pin cleaned up. Now I'm just going to anti-seize them good. Put a nice coat of anti-seize on them because they're going to be installed in the brake for probably 4 or 5 years. So give them a nice liberal coat of anti-seize. Once we've got anti-seize on the pin, we're going to put some Loctite blue on the threads so that will lock them in place. Okay, here's the new brake pad and the new brake pad sensor. And this sensor just clips into the slot here. And that's it. The new inside brake pad. It's got the brake sensor installed, and I'm going to put some ceramic brake lubricant on the shim in the back. Just give that a good coat. And also on these slide tangs here where the brake slides. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is mount the inside pad onto the hydraulic cylinder. These clips here spring inside of the holes in each cylinder. It's a little bit fiddly, but they go in fairly easy. The new brake pad has been clipped into the cylinder. Now I just want to feed this lead for the brake wear sensor up the other side and make it ready to plug in. The outside brake pad, and I just want to give that a coat of ceramic grease on the backside shim. Just give that a little smooth coat and then lubricate these tangs here where the brake actuates back and forth. Okay, we got the pads on in, and we're ready to put the caliper hydraulic cylinder back on. Before you do that, let's plug the brake sensor in, and that just plugs straight in there like so. Everything's ready to go back on. Everything's tight. Brake pads or shims are lubricated, and the caliper will just slide right over the brake pads, and now we're ready to put the pins in. The pin prepped. We have anti-seize on the sliding surface, Loctite blue on the threads, and we're just going to run this into the pin now. Get this lined up, and then we'll run it in. Lower pin is ready to go in, anti-seize, Loctite blue, and we'll just run that into the bottom end.
I can't get in there. There we go.
Pins are tight, bracket is tight, and then the next thing we're going to do is install these little caps in the end of the new rubber boots. They give you these with the axle pack, and just clip them right in. Last and final step is to install the new spring clip. The best way to do that is just hook it in here, down underneath, and then pry it back until you can get it locked in, and that's it. Okay, spring clip is installed, everything's tight, brake wear sensor plug is installed, got new rotors, new pads, everything's cleaned and lubricated, and this installation should be good for on this vehicle because we don't put a lot of miles on it, probably 4 or 5 years. Now, if you noticed in my videos, I do not call out torque specs. I leave that up to the mechanic to look it up for themselves for their own vehicles, but use the proper torque for your mechanical pieces, and please do not use Loctite red on these maintenance parts because somebody in the future is going to have to take them back apart again.